Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, wherever you might be. It's Jeff with Sockeye. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join the session today. I know some of you, I think, that are on here today. I know a lot of you folks, and some are new to me, so great to meet all of you. We're going to go through a few slides, and then we're going to jump in and spend most of the time in the software today. But please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A dialogue box. I'll keep an eye out for those today. While Taylor is doing the presenting, I'll let Taylor introduce himself when we get to jump into the software in there. But for those of you that I haven't met, I'm Jeff with Sockeye. I'm Senior Account Executive, been around in the Sage channel for close to 30 years, working with the Sage construction products. So it's nice to meet all of you guys today, at least virtually. But here is some of the topics, or the majority of the topics that we'll try to cover today, depending on questions. Obviously, we won't be able to get through all of the software, but we do want to make sure we kind of give a high level, probably more of a 30,000 foot view today into the software. A lot of you have not seen it before, but we're, of course, happy to take deeper dives into the software and do some follow-up presentations if it makes sense for you guys in there. So we'll try to make sure we touch on all of these things today. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Sockeye, I know we've had a lot of new customers that might have come from some other areas or other partners over the last course of the year. But Sockeye, just briefly, have been around since 2007. We are focused a lot on the Sage Intacct, at least kind of go forward on a lot of the stuff. That's the latest and greatest product we're going to look at today. Really, we're, 90% of what we do at Sockeye is focused around construction. We support a lot of customers. I know we have a lot of 300 customers on here today. It's one of the kind of the main focuses, but we do support a lot of 100 contractor and Sage 300 customers still. And then also we focus a lot today going forward on Sage construction management, which I'll talk about in a minute. But here may be a little history lesson. Those of you guys have been around a long time. I know a lot of 300 customers have. Kind of go back to the Timberline days. Sage 100 contractor, I should have put a Sage Master Builder logo up here, but that product came from Sage Master Builder. If we have some 100 contractor clients attending today. But over the years, it's transitioned to Sage 300 construction and real estate. But more recently, it's actually not that recent anymore, but back in 2016 or 2017, Sage acquired a product that was called Intacct at the time. And one of the reasons, or the big reason, is because Intacct is a cloud-based product written for the cloud from the ground up. One thing that's different about Intacct is it's a very horizontal product. Kind of different than our legacy products where it was only 100% construction. In the Intacct world, it's used in lots of different verticals, construction being one of those. So over the last many years, with the expertise of the Timberline / Sage group that has been around for a long time, 40 plus years in the construction space, have really built out and added the things that weren't there in the Intacct product in the beginning to make it, fully robust. They've been doing a lot of those things over the last many years. And then, of course, surpassed really the functionality and the feature sets and all the things that are in the Sage 300 construction today. And then more recently, just a little bit over a year ago, Sage acquired a product called CoreCon Technologies. And CoreCon Technologies is a cloud-based project management. Some of you folks may be aware of that, but others are not. I call it a Procore-like product, right? So it's a full operational pre-construction operation software that's really designed for the field from RFIs and transmittals and invitation to bid and some estimating components, project scheduling, quality, safety control, POs, subcontracts, change orders. So really going beyond where we've ever gone in the Sage family before, right? We always had Sage estimating, which is really about where we ended from a pre-construction standpoint. And then, we did some operational things, really more around POs and subcontracts and change orders. But now we have a tool that goes way beyond that. So they rebranded the product as Sage Construction Management. It was kind of officially released last October after they changed the UI and some other things. It already had integration to Sage Intacct, but it's a phenomenal product. In May, they did the release, integrates with Sage 100 Contractor and Sage 300 as well. So it's awesome to have our own tool. We do webinars on this product as well. I think we've got one in August. I can't remember, one in July. I should have known that. Maybe I'll look that up before we get to the end of the presentation today. But today we're here to focus on Sage Intacct, but I did want to make everybody aware of the Sage Construction Management because many customers haven't seen or heard about that product yet. But the Intacct, as I mentioned, was a product is built from the ground up for the cloud. So really taking advantage of modern architecture, modern cloud, open APIs, really. So not a product came from a back end of a server based and moved over. It was 100% written for the cloud. So really, we're able to take advantage of a lot of technology that we just can't do today with the Sage 300 and the architecture that is in the back end of the product, right? I mean, as you guys all know, it's been a great product. It's been around for 35 years. So it's written on an older technology. It's still a workhorse. It's just, there's only so much that, they can do with the product, which was one of the big reasons of moving to the Intacct solution. One thing that on this slide here, I'll point out is a little bit different. The Intacct is on the right over here. Most of you guys today are on this left side over here where you're hosting or you have your own server to host your 300. Some of you are in a hosted environment, maybe working with us through a SWISNet where we have your Sage 300 up on a cloud server. But Intacct's what's called a multi-tenant. So the true measure of a cloud software, meaning that all Intacct users, and there's 20 to 25,000 companies that are on Sage Intacct, meaning that every single company is running the same version of the software. So no versioning like we have today in 300, where you could be on a version 21 and somebody else could be on version 23. It's all in the cloud. So when a release of the software comes out, and that comes out 4 times a year on the August or in February, May, August, and November, when those releases come out on that Friday night, you come back in on Monday and you're on the new instance of the software. And so are all the other users of Sage Intacct as well. So they're really transparent to you as the user when those come out, and all the new features and functionality will be there. Doesn't mean they're necessarily all turned on, but those features are there for you guys. So being hosted not by Sage, but hosted on Microsoft platforms and AWS servers. So really, top level providers with, all the backups, things that are taking place, bank level security, SOX compliance. Can provide more information around that if anybody wants to see that information. And then a lot of Intacct we're going to look at today is it's very visual in its reporting, right? So web browser, when you log in, there's a lot of dashboards and reports today in your Sage 300. I like to refer to our reports today as they're pretty static, right? So we have reports that are very static. You might have Inquiry Designer where you do some drill down capabilities, but in Intacct, any report really can be added to a dashboard. So dashboards and reports are intertwined together in the Sage Intacct, I like to say. So when I'm on a dashboard, I'm really in a report, but I can drill down if I have the security to drill down all the way to the transaction level. And I can see that transaction. I can do something with it if I have the security rights to be able to do that in there. So we'll spend time on dashboards and reports. And then really, if you're a company that's in a multi-entity environment, Intacct lends itself really well to that. So we do accounting at what's called the top level, and Taylor will show that today, where we could be in the software and see all of your entities in the environment. We could be reporting on a dashboard, real-time consolidated financials across those entities, but the ability to drill down very quickly or pivot on one of those points. Or if I'm a user that only gets to work within one entity and not the other, they're not going to see those entities. So intercompany accounting, due to, due froms consolidated financials are all happening real time. So not different data folders or a different data structure, right? We're really all in the same environment, and they're in what we call also a dimensional general ledger in Intacct. So a dimensional general ledger really simplifies your chart of accounts to like a 5-digit base account, and other things that we might have traditionally tracked on a GL, like a department or a division or a prefix or a suffix. Those get tracked as what we call dimensions in Intacct. And so you can pivot on a dimension. It could be like a line of business. If you wanted to see a line of business, I could choose that dimension, hit apply, and now my dashboard will re-render based on that line of business or that region or that location or that project manager. So really being able, like a big pivot table, to jump to that different data. And then inside of Intacct, I know a lot of these names are recognizable to you as users, but in Intacct, it's much more open. We have 300 to 400 companies that have built-in integration to Intacct because it's cloud-based and an open APIs. Some of these folks here on this screen have integrations to 300 or 100, but in Intacct, like I said, it's a much bigger pool. So different payroll solutions, different expense reporting tools, different AP automation tools, HR tools. But just opens up the door to a lot of other companies and integrations that we don't have today in 300 because of the closed architecture of the back end in there. So today we'll start out when I'm going to pass this over to Taylor, but we're going to start out with a high level navigation of Intacct, kind of laying the groundwork to show, things that apply in the software. It's really good to see what you can do in the software, where you can go. And then we'll get into more transactional type stuff. And like I said, we won't be able to go in too low a level of detail today, but we can do follow-up presentations. But as you have questions, I'll keep an eye. Feel free to ask those through the Q&A in there. So I'm going to stop sharing, Taylor. I'm going to let you take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jeff. I will get my screen shared out for everybody. All right. Jeff, everybody with me?
Yep. I can see your dashboard.
Fantastic. All right. Well, before we dig in, I'll just give a quick intro to myself. Again, Taylor Magnus. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. My background is primarily in public accounting, audit specifically, so pretty financial reporting heavy. From there, I worked as a senior accountant for a bit before really ultimately deciding I wanted to get in on the system side of things. And so I came to Sockeye, and I was actually on the delivery and implementation side. So I was helping customers move over from whatever their previous solution was over into Intacct. But more recently, I've taken on what's a little more of a pre-sale role as a sales engineer here. And as part of that, I get to run demos and webinars and talk about the system and kind of what that could look like for different companies that engage with us. But as far as how I'm going to run this, I'm going to take us through just a quick navigation overview to get us all kind of oriented in the system. Then we'll come back into the dashboards and reporting, and then out into the transactional side of things. But just like Jeff said, as you guys have questions, please throw them in the Q&A. We'll definitely do the best we can to get those answered. I will kill my camera just so you guys can focus on content here, and we'll get kicked off. So coming into the system, we are sitting at what we call a dashboard right now. Jeff was hitting on these a little bit earlier. But the first thing I'm going to call out is up here, the top left. And so this is what we call our entity dropdown. And it's from here that we can toggle between all of our available entities. But what you'll notice right away is that we're sitting at something we call the top level. And so what that means for us from a reporting and accounting perspective is that at this top level, I can, one, transact across all those entities. I can also look at consolidated reporting across our entities. And then when we want to, say, take a bill and allocate that bill out to 2, 3, 4, 5 different entities, I can do that from this top level on the same bill screen. We also have records that can be created at this top level and then shared across those entities. And so that could be a customer record, vendor record, project record. And we also have some intercompany automation available to us as well. Whereas we are, in the past, a user would have to get all that balancing kind of due from activity reflected anytime we have activity that crosses entity lines. Whereas here we have a mapping that we create during implementation. And then when we have that activity that crosses entity lines, we just allow the system to automate those postings for us. And then what we will also most often do is disallow direct postings to those do from accounts, just to prevent any of that imbalance. But once I'm ready to jump into an individual entity, I'll come down, I'll click on one, it'll open up a new tab for me. And then given that it's a web-based system, right, I can pretty quickly right-click that tab. I can duplicate it. I could have a bill up on one screen and a report up on the other. I could be working within one application, within one tab, and another application within another. And when I'm ready to jump into an actual application, I'll come here. And so this is our application pull down, kind of all the typical areas we come to expect, maybe plus a few more. This is a sales demo environment, obviously. But if I came in and I double-clicked on any of these, it would bring us to something we call our workbench. And so as you can see, it's just kind of a visual icon-based approach to what the most commonly used areas within that application are. But if I were to come back into my dropdown, it's here that I can see that full comprehensive list of that functionality that lives within each individual application. Now, the next thing I'll call out are these little star icons. I can toggle these on and off. Essentially, all I'm doing there is creating my own kind of personalized favorites list. Typically, users are touching the same 10, 15, maybe 20 areas of the system each and every day. And so we can just set that up for ourselves. And then the last thing I'll call out here are these little plus icons. If I were to click on vendors, for example, it would bring me to my full vendors list. But if we click on that plus icon, it's essentially just a shortcut for us right to that record creation screen for whatever record type it is that we're trying to work with. Last thing I'll call out before we jump back into the dashboards and reporting is just in regards to security and permissions. So the system is a role-based system. And so all that means for us really is that when we're bringing on new users, rather than having to build out user-specific security permissions and settings, we are building out predefined roles. And then at the role that we're assigning those permissions, let me assign those roles to users. And so if we were bringing on an AP clerk, for example, just a simple example, and I only wanted them to see accounts payable and maybe cash management here, I can assign that new user that AP clerk role that we have pre-built out. The rest of these things would drop out of view. And then going beyond that, it gets really, really granular within the actual applications themselves as far as what it is we want that user, that role to be able to see and touch, interact with. Now, coming back into our dashboards. So before I dig into any of these elements here, I just want to kind of quickly talk over a high level what it is that these dashboards are and what it is that we can do with them. And so these dashboards, one, we can have as many as we want. And so what that means is that, excuse me, guys, we can custom tailor these dashboards to, it could be by entity or physical location or department or individual user. If we wanted a controller dashboard, and then we also wanted all of our PMs to have their own personalized dashboard with their, say, 5 favorite reports and all of their approvals outstanding. We could do something like that. And when it comes to actually adding a new element in here, I can just come over to this plus icon and it brings me into some of our groupings, different items that we can pull in. I'm in this general grouping now. So I could pull in a billboard or a calendar or main shortcuts. If I come into my reports, got all of those pre-built reports that we have. Those are essentially living in this reporting area here, but then we're electing to bring them in to this dashboard in particular. So these are really open to us to kind of define and build out just based on the end user that we expect to be coming in here and using this dashboard in particular. Now, starting at the top right, I'll call out a few things. So we've got a number of filters that I added to this dashboard. There are other filters available, but these are the ones that I felt worked best for this report set. And so as we're looking at these, I've got a date filter here I could utilize. I've got a department filter. I've got locations. This could represent entities. It could represent physical locations. It could represent groups of physical locations. If I wanted to say filter down and look at profitability by region, for example, I could do that. And then I've also got this projects filter here. And I think this one does a good job of kind of highlighting what it is that we can do with these filters and on these dashboards. And so with this projects filter, I could filter down by an individual job. I could filter down by a line of work or maybe industry served. I can also filter by individual PM if I want to. So if I come in, grab up Dennis, so we hit apply, this entire dashboard then re-renders for us. And so we are now only looking at those projects or jobs where Dennis was tagged as that project manager. So I think this is the best point in the demo to kind of step back for a second and talk about the dimensional GL within Intacct. So when we think about older, smaller, legacy accounting solutions, typically the way that they were capturing and achieving granularity was at the chart of accounts level. And so what we most often see is a big, massive chart of accounts. It was typically a segmented chart of accounts where we'd have a base account and we would have sub accounts appended to that. And those sub accounts essentially represent certain attributes that we're trying to code against and then better break out and analyze within our reporting. So within Intacct, we approach this really differently. We use these things called dimensions. And so these dimensions are essentially standalone fields at the point of transaction entry. And so I like to pull up a bill as I talk about this, because I think it gives a good visual into what it is that we're talking about. So as we come down here into our details, I start to see these dimensions and these fields come out and into play. And so I've got my project related dimensions here. I've got an item dimension, department, location. If I hit show details, I have more below. I've got resource or employee here. I've got vendor, customer class. And so again, it's here at the transaction level that we're capturing all that detail, all that granularity. And so what that translates to for us is a much more dynamic data set, right? Versus that more conventional flat structure when we were doing all of this at the chart of accounts. And so what we can start to do is pivot these things around and slice and dice. If I have revenue and cost associated with or tagged to one of these dimensions, I can put it into a P&L. I can look at profitability by project, by customer, by PM or a piece of equipment. And so that's kind of what it's opening up for us, is that ability to look at and analyze these things from different angles. Now, actually, before I clear that filter, I'll just click on one of these hyperlinks. So you'll notice as we're rolling through this, anywhere we see hyperlinks indicates to us an area that we can drill into. And so that might be my open commitments, all my POs and subcontracts. It might be actual cost that has come in against those. In this case, I've pulled up a project record. And if I come down, it's here where I can see Dennis was tagged as that project manager. And so that's what was allowing for that filterability on this dashboard. I'll do this filter. I'll call out a few things really quickly. So here at the top, we have what we call performance cards. These are essentially just snapshot metrics or KPIs. They can be simple month over month comparisons. They can be calculations that we build out. The system can house and maintain both financial and non-financial data. That non-financial data is housed in what we call statistical accounts. Then we can turn around and incorporate that into some of these metrics. These are interactive, just like everything else in the dashboard. So if I were to come in here and click on, we'll take this month to date project cost. So it would bring up this screen here. I can pretty quickly see all of the amounts that are kind of making up or composing my total cost of sales. But it's ultimately these two here that are driving that delta or that change that we have calculated out there. Talk about this report in just a second. I'm going to roll down to the bottom. I've got some visual representations of some of this data. All of these are interactive as well. I can drill into them. So if I want to take this AP by project here and we came into this health center of green, I could pull that up, and similar to that performance card up there, it pulls up this screen where I could drill into any of those transactions, making up those amounts or driving that chart or that graph. Now, coming back up to the top, I'd like to call out this report or kind of talk it over really. And so as we come into this report here, overall, it's a pretty simple report. It's really just our open projects as our rows here. Columns you guys are likely seeing each and every day, right? I've got original contract, my estimate, commitments, total cost. If I wanted to start doing research from this dashboard, maybe I wanted to look at these open commitments, I could come in here for the Smith's hardware store. And then within a few clicks, I can get all the way down into those source transactions. And so here in this case, it looks like we'll be looking at subcontract 24, and I can pull that up. And so we are now sitting at that subcontract record within the system. And so I've got some typical header level information, right? I've got date, vendor, project that come down. I've got a number of fields here we could use or not use kind of based on need. These can also help populate some of our printed document outputs from the system. I do like to call this out. This is called Spend Insight. This lives within kind of the various purchasing and cost areas of the system. But what it is doing is in real time, as a user is coding, be it a PO or a subcontract or an invoice or even a journal entry, if we're allowing for that validation, it is validating against our established budget for that job all the way down to the cost type. And so when a user is coming in here and coding, we can configure this to react one of two ways. We can have it just flag or warn us, or it would essentially populate a banner up here at the top that says and spells out exactly where it is that we're over budget on which line in that document, but they could be allowed to proceed. The alternative to that is we can actually have it put a full stop on that transaction to the point where that user would need to save that transaction down in a draft form. So they won't lose any of their work, but they'll need to save it down in a draft form. And we will need to get a revision pushed through to this budget before that transaction will be allowed to pass and post. So just some guardrails essentially that we can put up both on the buyout side as well as on an ongoing basis, right? As that project is moving forward. But this I like to call out as well. This is called our collaborate feed. This here also lives really all throughout the system on just about every record type. But what it allows for is that users can come in here and communicate and collaborate directly on these source documents. And so if I wanted to come in here, I could tag another user. I think I've got Brandon in here. Maybe I don't. Got Clint. I can say, hey, about this thing. And when I hit share, so Brandon will receive an alert within the system up here in this little text bubble. He'll also receive an email with a hyperlink that will bring him directly to whichever record it is that this is coming off of. And so Brandon or Clint can come straight in here. They can respond. They could upload a supporting file, whatever they need to do. Like I said, it's all throughout the system. And so I've seen this used all kinds of different ways, kind of across clients. I mean, it could be something as simple as collection notes on a customer record. It could be some back and forth in our month-end close, checklist assignments. Maybe we have some new reconciliation that we're dealing with. We've got some back and forth there. All of this communication lives in perpetuity on that record that it originated from. And so as long as this record exists within the system, so does that back and forth. A few things I'll call out here. We do have a change documents tab, so we can get visibility into any of those change documents associated with or tagged to this original subcontract. I've got my posting details, pretty much exactly what it sounds like. My history tab, this I do like to talk over briefly, just because I think it's one of the biggest advantages to these dashboards is the ability to do research. Obviously, we've got real-time reporting, but as I come in here, what I see on this history tab is, one, if we had an approval workflow running for this subcontracts workflow type, I would get visibility into who submitted, who approved, kind of that full approval workflow. What I can see here, though, I didn't have the approval workflow working in this instance. What I can see is every single invoice that has come in against this subcontract. And so all these things are linked back and forth. And so if I wanted to, maybe I was a PM and I just want to do some research, maybe I want to see if this invoice had been paid, maybe our vendor reached out to us. I can come in here, I can click on that hyperlink and I can get all the way to those related invoices. I can see if it's been paid. This one has, there's my check number. And so, that's really what I like to hit on. If somebody has the right user type and permissions set up, they can come in here and do their own research for things that traditionally, operations would have needed to reach out to accounting and finance. Accounting and finance has to go find those answers. Somebody's waiting on those answers. And so we just have more of a kind of a free flow of information, all based on permissions, obviously, what it is that we want to allow people to access. But very last thing I'll call out here, we do have an audit trail as well. So any and all modifications to these records are logged on the back end all the way down to the field that was modified, as well as the actual change that occurred. Jeff, how are we doing? I might pause for just a second. Any questions come up so far?
We're doing great. So far,
great.
so good.
Awesome. All right. Last couple of things here on this dashboard. I can revise these reports straight from the dashboard. Granted, we have the permissions to do so. But I can, if I have those permissions, click on this little pencil icon. And I just like to show a couple of sections from this report writer just because it's pretty intuitive. And so as we come to this report writer, I could duplicate this report. I could make a quick, a couple little tweaks or revisions if I needed to, and I could actually add a new, that new version or flavor of that report straight to the dashboard that we created. I come into my rows. Here is where I defined that we wanted to be looking at our active projects. I could set my level of detail here, maybe expand by another dimension under that. If I come into my columns, I can pretty quickly add column to the right, move column to the right, remove column. I have the ability to define which budget it is I want to pull in, or maybe I want to expand that column by dimensions. If I had a condensed balance sheet and I wanted to expand that by all of my actual physical locations, I could do that within a few clicks. But really intuitive report writer. And then we can bring these reports out a number of different ways. So I hit that magnifying glass like I did there. Got a number of different ways I could run it. HTML is essentially just a nice kind of crisp full screen view of that report. I can print or email directly from the system. We can also set a cadence or a schedule on any of these reports and have those automatically generated out for us on that cadence and even emailed out automatically on that cadence. So that could be daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it is that we need to do there. And then I can export to Excel. That doesn't sound terribly exciting, but I've worked in a number of older systems, and I just remember what a great time it was to have to clean up data for 30 minutes anytime you try to export anything. So I like to show this. So this is
Taylor,
where
this is very exciting for Sage 300 users. Don't underestimate the power of an Excel export that actually looks like your export.
it's true. We have gotten some big smiles on demos for sure. Right. Very last thing, just surrounding dashboards. I've been showing you guys a whole bunch of reporting and what it is that we can do there. These dashboards can be functional as well. So if I pop into this approvals dashboard, really similar look and feel, right? I've got these performance cards at the top. I've got this collaborate feed, so any of those messages to or from me. But as I come down, what I start to see are essentially what represent approvals outstanding sitting in my queue for review and approval. And so these are coming from various areas of the system. I've got purchasing transactions, payments, bills, journal entries, timesheets. And so again, these dashboards are really open for us to define kind of what it is that we want to bring in here. If I wanted to, I could approve straight from here. So if I hit this magnifying glass, it brings me to the screen. I could approve or decline straight from here. I could pull up that journal entry. This is a JE, so I'm likely looking for some kind of supporting reconciliation here in this attachment field. But again, really, really open for us to define what this ends up looking like. All right. Made it through dashboards and reporting. I'm going to move us out into the transactional side of things. So we pulled up a manual bill earlier as we were talking over those dimensions, but I do want to talk over AP automation. So AP automation within Intacct is using a combination of OCR and AI to essentially take the first pass at the coding for us. And so there's two ways to kick off this process and essentially get invoices running through this process. So we can upload those invoices. I can click and drag up to 30 invoices into this area here. These are my accepted file types. Sage also provides us with a monitored email inbox. So you could have your vendors send in those invoices. I think most of our customers are essentially forwarding out, maybe it's a subset of their invoices into that monitored email inbox. But once they come in, this is what it will look like. So it comes in a draft form. It automatically attaches a copy of that invoice that came in. But this is something important to call out. So it comes in a draft form. It will never, ever code and post for us. A user does have to come in here and touch this document. At the very least, come in and hit post here. But that's actually an important step in the process, right? Because it's at that step that we as the user come in to do our review that we're allowing the AI the opportunity to learn based on those revisions. And so as we come in here, we can see this is a sales demo environment. So I've never had operational data running through here for it to learn off of, but we can see it grabbed up my vendor, my bill number, didn't grab up my terms in this case. But if I came in as the user and I said, okay, looks like it's net 30 here. I'm going to grab up this net 30. The AI isn't going to make that association, right? And get better and better as it sees this more and more. And then the AI here is going to attempt to code the account, the location or entity, as well as the department. And then it will also use previous codings to try to fill out our other dimensions based on how it is that we coded those the last time. The line, it's essentially looking at the lines, the number of lines in the last bill, and we'll use the coding on each of those respective lines from the last bill to try to populate these. But it is learning with us. And so as you'd expect, the first couple of months are kind of a learning phase for it, right? It's watching how it is that we're doing these things and coding these things. And then the other thing I would note is, it's not just learning from us. So Sage has actually come out and said, if the system, this AI engine sees the same invoice from the same vendor, same invoice format rather, from the same vendor 3 separate times on 3 separate customer environments, it will take what they call a digital fingerprint of that invoice. And then if there are any modifications or alterations that we're not expecting, it will flag those. So maybe our payment details or address it can flag those variations as being, suspicious, kind of indicating to us, hey, maybe we need to take an extra level of review here, or maybe reach out to the vendor and make sure this is legitimate. Jeff, are we doing okay on questions?
Yep. I think we're doing fine. I did have a couple questions come in, but there are things that you actually just covered as
Oh,
part
great.
of the questions already. So
Awesome.
you're anticipating the questions.
Love it. Perfect. All right. Well, moving out from accounts payable, really accounts payable in most cases is for a lot of G&A type costs, simply due to the fact that while we do have some simple approval workflows in AP, we don't have workflows where we could move from, say, a PO through an invoice step or subcontract through an invoice step. Those are captured in purchasing. And so most of our job or project related cost is running through purchasing. And so this all tab is really more or less where a user would be living. But the place I like to call out is actually a little more on the back end than the configuration, only because I think this gives a good visual into how it is that these things kind of push and flow from step to step. And so the design of this is very open for us to define. And so in this case, this sample company doesn't look like it's really dealing with inventory. But if we were dealing with inventory, I could open up a receiver step between this purchase order and this purchasing invoice, and we could have somebody in the warehouse receive those goods and affect our inventory subledger, maybe accrue that cost prior to the actual invoice coming in. So very open for us to kind of define what this ends up looking like. And that's obviously a big part of implementation, as we're kind of flushing through these things with you guys and talking about what this flow needs to look like. Maybe, do we want some approval steps on any of these workflow steps here? So very, very open for us to design out. But when it comes to actually using these flows, so I would come back to this all tab, and I'm going to use this subcontracts workflow type as my example here. So as we come into this list, what I can see right away is I have this state column. This essentially indicates to us what stage or step that this purchasing document is in. Pending essentially represents, it could be a PO that we've had a receiving activity against. It could be a subcontract without any invoice activity against that. Partially converted is kind of what it sounds like. Maybe we received a partial shipment on a PO, or maybe we've had a few invoices on a subcontract, but we still have some of that open committed cost on that subcontract. And then converted means there's nothing else left to do. We've received against that entire PO, or we've invoiced out against that entire subcontract. But once I receive an invoice against one of these things, I'll take this EnviroLogic subcontract 219 as an example. So when we receive an invoice against one of these subcontracts, I would come in, I'd hit convert, pick subcontract invoice. And what I see right away is that all of my coding is already pulling over from that original commitment. So my date, vendor, project, terms, all my coding, all of that's already done. So we don't have to redo any of that. We code this one time when we establish that commitment, and then we convert invoices off of that commitment. And so really the only thing I need to do here as the user is come in, put in my invoice number, and mirror up my lines to my invoice. So if they're billing us, maybe it's $12,750 this period. We would come in, key that in, hit post or submit. And it's really at this step, kind of tying back to that report that we're talking over on the dashboard. It's at this step that we're moving this $12,750 out of those commitments and over into total cost, right? Because those commitments, we're tracking all of it, but it's not accrued cost yet. So it's at this point that we're accruing that cost. And then if I were to come back into the subcontract, we would see we're billing $12,750 against it. Our original amount was $20,000. So we would have essentially $7,250 remaining to invoice against on that commitment.
Hey, Taylor, can you talk about, you mentioned post and submit up there, the difference between what post would mean and what the process is when it says submit?
Oh, sure.
Back inside, what happens next?
Yeah. So that's all just based on whether or not we have an approval policy defined for this subcontract invoice workflow step. So I didn't in this instance. So it just says post. If I had an approval workflow assigned here, it would say submit. And that's just that nice visual cue for ourselves, whether, it's going to go through and just post automatically, or if it's going to run through an approval process. And that's all of our approval workflows, at least for purchasing, are defined here. And so I can actually pop into one of these and talk this over. So these are where it is that we set up our approval policies. And then these policies are specific to we call them transaction definitions, but they essentially just represent workflow steps for us. And so this approval policy is on my subcontracts step. And if I were to pull up the actual policy itself.
So while this is coming up, some of you guys that use maybe TimberScan or Sage Paperless, with some of that kind of functionality, like with the routing and approval around these purchase orders or these subcontracts before they possibly get turned into invoices.
Yeah. This is where it is that we're defining that. That's all housed here, kind of on the back end of the configuration. We would build that out during implementation with you guys. But yeah, this is where it is that we would define it. I mean, if I wanted to say we can have a PM approval as our first step. So essentially based on the project that we're coding to and the PM that we defined on that project record, like I showed you guys earlier, where Dennis was our project manager, it would route out based on those two things. And then I could do a subsequent step if I wanted to. Maybe we wanted a kind of progressive dollar-based threshold approach. Could define those thresholds. In this case, we're essentially saying PM or project manager is my step one. After that approval comes through, it would look to this step. Anything under 5,000, we're saying we're fine. We don't need subsequent approval after our PM approval. Anything between 5 and 10, maybe we want one level 1 approver. Anything beyond 10, maybe I want 2 level 2 approvers, and these are all set at those roles. But really, really open to us to kind of build these out during the implementation phase. From there, where I jump into projects, we'll call out. So we do have where we've gone through, AP and purchasing. We do have within cash management something called bank feeds. And so this can help reconcile all that cash activity. And so within Intacct, and this is the case both for cash accounts as well as credit cards, we have the ability to connect to those financial institutions. And so when we do that, we would do it here. So this is one of our checking accounts. Once we do that and establish that connection, Intacct will pull down those cleared transactions up to once every 6 hours. And then with that activity that we have pulling in, we can set up some automation. And so there's 2 different rule types that we have available to us. We have matching rules and we have create rules. And so the matching rules, essentially, we're going to provide the system with what it needs to be looking for within that activity to auto match our book and bank transactions. And the create rule is similar in that we're going to provide the system with what it needs to look for. We are also going to provide the coding that we want it to use every single time it sees that transaction type come through. And so that could be recurring activity for us, right? That could be bank fees or finance charges or, an Uber charge on a sales guy's credit card, right? Every single time that we see that transaction type come through, it will auto draft that transaction for us and get it coded out. Very last thing, I did lie. I realized I wanted to talk over our vendor compliance, which is something that Sage has been building on over the last few quarters. We do have the ability to track our compliance records for these vendors. And so with this, we can we have 2 validation types. We have the ability to validate whether or not a document has been received or whether or not a document is expired. And so if it's received, maybe it's some sort of certification that we want from that vendor, that subcontractor, or maybe it's our copy of insurance that we want to track our expiration date on. But once we have set up those documents that we want the system to be looking for, we can then configure it very similar to that spend insight to essentially just warn or completely disallow payment to that vendor or subcontractor until someone has gone in and put that document into a compliant state. And so if we were to run into issues, we would have a hyperlink get thrown here that we could dig into and look at which document it is that's out of compliance. Now, to move us into our projects area, I know we only have a few minutes left here, but coming into our projects module here. So the first thing I want to call out what we'll dig into is our actual projects listing. Because what I see as I come in here is that we have the ability to create and define relationships between these jobs and then essentially capture, it could be a phase or a building or a unit, right? So we can define those hierarchies and these can go up to 10 levels deep. So in this case, I've only got three, right? Orange, green, blue. But this could go 10 levels deep in that hierarchy. I don't know if that's ever a goal for anybody, but should you need to capture that level of granularity, we can. And then obviously, under each of these jobs, we would have our work breakdown structure, right, with all our cost codes and cost types.
And I would add to that, for those of you that use extras today in Sage 300, or even if you're using phases in Sage 100 Contractor, that green square there that's as low, or that's as detailed as you can get right at a sub level in there. So this obviously opens up the door to a much greater level of reporting and tracking than you have today. But yeah, as Taylor said, 10's probably not the goal, but sometimes 3 or 4 might be the goal at a few different levels. So a lot more flexibility around job reporting and also cost codes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's a good segue. I'm actually going to come back to my entity level here. That would be the next thing that I could pop into would be our cost code catalog here. And very much in the same way, kind of like Jeff was touching on, we can define those relationships, right? So that when we're doing our reporting, we can be looking at these things at the most granular kind of expanded level, or we could be looking at it from more kind of rolled up summary perspective as well. And then something I would also call out here is that this is our cost code catalog, kind of our global list, but we can have subsets of these cost codes. And so if I wanted to, if we had a certain job types that always used one set of cost codes and a different, job type that used a different set of cost codes, we can set up these subsets where, in this case, I've just appended a bar to the front of these. Maybe it's our residential jobs. We can build those out, those subsets, so that when we are creating this job within the system, we can kind of streamline that job creation. Next thing talk over is estimates. So the project record itself, that's kind of the top level, the first step of creating a project, right? We would create our project record. From there, we would bring in estimates against it, as well as our contracts. But if I pop into this estimates area, we do have the ability to house and maintain multiple estimates against this job. We put forecasts in the same bucket, but we use different estimate types. But in this case, we can see, I have a current estimate here. That might be my original plus any change orders. And then I've got a couple of forecasts here. I've got a current forecast. Maybe we call that our July forecasted cost to complete or at completion. And then I've got my historical here. That might be for June. We can house and maintain all that history that we can then go back and refer to. Maybe we want to talk with the PM about why our forecast swung so much month over month, right? But we can have all that there available to us. From there, we'll talk over invoice generation. So we have the ability to do both progress or, fixed cost, lump sum, progress billings. We also have the ability to do time materials as well. I'll do a progress bill first. I'll grab up to our sugar shop job here. Bill through end of the month. This is what the screen looks like as we come in. I've got some header level information here. I've got customer, project, my contract. I come down, I've got my contract summary. It looks like our last app was app 2. So I'll call this app 3. My billing summary and change order summary as well. So it's kind of my 2 date figures, total retainage, all to date, earn less retainage, balance to finish. This is all helping to populate our invoice output. But as I come down, what I start to see is essentially my SOV, my lines here. And so I've got, as I come across, original price, approved changes, revised total, previously billed. But when I'm ready to bill against one of these lines, I can come in here. Maybe we say on this line, we are 75% complete to date. it will auto calculate out how much it is we need to bill in that line. I can do the reverse as well. So if I said, we're just going to bill out 6,500 this period, the reverse would happen and it would auto calculate that. Um, we are also calculating and tracking all of our retainage, both on the revenue side as well as the cost side. But I would go through here and I would fill out all my lines. And then just for the sake of time, I'll pull up one that's already done just to show what the output can look like. So this is what our output looked like in this case. And this is, so I've got my summary page on the front and all my detail on the back. What I would note though, as we're coming in here, is that every single printed output from the system is essentially just a Word document driven by mail merge fields. So the mail merge fields are what are pulling in these figures here. But if we wanted to tweak or revise any of our printed outputs from the system, I could pull out that template. Maybe I just wanted to revise this language here, right? I could pull out that template, revise this language, load it back in, and have it come out with that modified language. I can also have templates that are specific to customers. We have a lot of clients that deal with this, right? Where they will have certain customers that just have to see billing a certain way, has to be presented a certain way. And so we can do is we could maybe call this our default template. And then I can pull out another copy and mock it up to those customer specifications. And then we can load that copy back into the system and assign it to that customer record. So that each and every time we generate an invoice out for that customer specifically, it will come out with that custom format specific to them. Now we do, as I said, have the ability to do time materials as well. I'm going to come to the same place to do that. So within projects, I'll come back to generate invoices. I'll grab up what I know is my T&M job here. That's my tell for myself, Tim and Mary's. Bill through the end of the month for this one as well. As we come in, exact same look and feel, right? I've got that header level information up here at the top. Got my contract summary. It looks like we haven't actually had any invoices for this one yet. Same billing summary and change order summary here. But really, as I come down, the important part for these is that I have all of my costs that are flowing through, right? So I can see here, in this case, it's my timesheet entries. I could pull up any of those timesheets. This one's for Felix. And these are all the actual, what it is that we're going to charge out. It's all driven by rate tables. But as I come down, I've got my employee expenses, accounts payable expenses, just like the timesheet. I can pull up whatever invoice it is that was related to, purchasing transactions, order entry, general ledger, all the way down to credit card transactions. And so as you'd expect, the user will essentially come in here and deselect anything we're not ready to actually invoice out this period. Anything that we deselect will then repopulate for us the next time that we come in to generate an invoice for this job. But again, just for the sake of time, I'll pull up one that's already done and just show another sample output that again could be customized. So if we wanted to add columns here, maybe we wanted our notes to come through from the timesheets, we could add another column and have those populate in as well. We made it through everything I wanted to hit on today. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. To save a couple of minutes for Jeff to tie off. Jeff, is anything you feel like I skipped over or didn't hit? Maybe I could touch on, or any questions?
I think we covered most of the agenda. Maybe wrap on a financial dashboard, kind of end on a dashboard, and I know we started on there. Maybe we'll end over there. And again, all of these things that Taylor's showing today they're all customizable, very customizable.
Yeah, I even think I could give a good example. I talked about how we could pretty quickly tweak these things. If I came into this balance sheet by location, for instance, looks like I have this already set to expand actual physical locations. But if I wanted to come in here and just kind of on the fly, look at this a different way, I could come into this column here. We could say, actually, I'm just going to say, do not expand in this instance. New preview. That's how quickly I modified that. So we've now condensed it down to our summary, one column balance sheet. Very open for us to define and modify and tweak, all kind of on the fly for us. That's what I wanted to hit. Yep, I'll hand it back to you to tie us off.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. Appreciate it. Really good job. I know it's a lot of stuff to cover in a very short amount of time, but hopefully everybody got at least a good overview and a good flavor of some of the capabilities of Sage Intacct, and you saw some of the areas that the software can really help with and maybe streamline processes. I know even in Sage 300, we've talked to a lot of customers that are doing their billing outside of the system still, or their forecasting or WIP reporting. It's very common. And we've seen customers when they move to Intacct really pull those into the software and really help to streamline those processes, especially those companies that are in a multi-entity environment too. A lot of you guys have, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 different data folders, and Intacct can really help in that particular area as well. So appreciate everybody's time today. I know we're right at the top of the hour, but the next webinar is today. I guess I didn't update that on there, but feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to help. We can set up further presentations for your team to dig a little deeper into more specific things about that pertain to your company. We'll be sharing this recording out as well. So look for some follow-up information from Sockeye around that. So again, thanks everybody for your time. Great job today, Taylor, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.